Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's the 15th of May. And it's gorgeous outside. Holy crap. I mean,
it is.
It's been humid a few times in the last couple days, and it rained like crazy last night. But it is fantastic. This is like the weather, the kind of weather that I put up with really crappy weather like throughout the year, just to have a few days of this kind of weather. And so I appreciate it when it happens. Like,
yeah, you can
go outside without
open.
having to sweat. With you can, like, you don't have to stand still to catch a breeze.
The swamp humidity hasn't quite set in yet.
Oh man, that's right. Summer swamp ass is upon all of us, whether we like it or not. There's no escaping it. I mean, there's fans and air conditioning, of course, but I'm pretty sure air conditioning is contributing to global warming, so I'm not sure what we can do about that. Or if we should do anything about it.
Well, there's like non-electricity based air conditioning solutions. One of the ones I've seen is like a wall of clay pots that has water poured over it. And then that's one of the more traditional approaches. And then there's like gigantic fans. There's shit that we're not being offered here in America that other countries have no choice.
Well, I'm aware of,
because they're so much farther beyond.
I think it's like, I think it's Iran. There's like a style of architecture where they incorporate this kind of venturi conical shape on the top of buildings, and through convection it draws air up through the top of buildings and then out, and cools entire structures with no fans, no moving parts.
I wouldn't be surprised with that.
Just like heat exchange and convection. And I think that's pretty cool. I would like to see a trend of building more like a shelter house above a house to shade the entire structure. I think that would be a solution. Because, we historically, humans have always sought shade to escape the heat. And it makes sense adding an additional heat shield above a home, or above an air conditioner that's sitting outside a home. That would improve conditions by preventing direct heat exchange from occurring from sunlight. Especially because heat is like the enemy of all things, especially electronics.
Well, and I think it's unmanaged, or not necessarily even managed, heat with no heat sink is the problem. So it's like heat is a byproduct of motion in many cases, or just direct exposure to radiation. So it's like if there's no means for that mechanical heat buildup or radioactive heat buildup to dissipate, then that's when it seems to become a huge problem and start to melt things or cause dysfunction in systems. And that's kind of where, when we have materials like mica in the heat shield of the space shuttle. It's like that's what's keeping it from burning up on reentry. And it's really interesting to see, these facilities be able to be built to handle trillion degrees Fahrenheit, uh, to reproduce the the I guess the radioactive slash magneto electrochemical uh, process of the sun to actually be able to harness that shit. But in the process, it has to be able to manage trillion degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, and that's like just the notion of that. Like a thousand billion degrees. I don't even know what that would entail, like in the sense of when things start to get too close to the sun that aren't of the proper material, the heat just melts it and it can't actually even touch the surface of the sun. So that's why when scientists
it's like it's a self reinforcing thermonuclear fission fusion reaction.
Yeah. So then when we were able, like, not we, when scientists, definitely, I was not part of that process. So when people use that colloquial we to talk about scientific accomplishments, it's like very weird. But when scientists were able to create a craft that touched the surface of the sun, that's why that shit's such a huge deal. Because, I mean, the temperatures alone, but to be able to make something that like functions and is able to relay information after experiencing those types of dynamic temperature fluctuations from going to like negative 400 Fahrenheit to 10 billion Fahrenheit and still be able to function.
I think of anything that can withstand fluctuations in I mean the intense pressure that has to be created by the fusion and fission of hydrogen and helium at that scale. And then the gravity that pulls it all back because the sun is actually a massive object. It has intense gravity that can hold back a nuclear explosion the size of a sun. And this thing can withstand that. Yeah. I wonder what kind of cooling system they're using.
Well, okay, not to misrepresent, the surface of the sun is 27 million degrees Fahrenheit, so it's not a billion. I was obviously being hyperbolic with my language, but it's like at that point, it's like, what's the fucking difference, And that's where I'm like trying to fathom. I mean, even 1,000 degrees, like,
well,
that's the shit where it heats up.
This is more complex than that because space is like mostly a vacuum, and as you in a vacuum, temperature requirements change. So the closer those reactions are to the vacuum of space, the lower the temperature requirements become for all of that volatility. And then closer to the core of the sun, because the pressure is so intense, like it stabilizes the reaction at even higher temperatures than would normally be possible.
Okay, so
it's even crazier.
The world record that I found for the CERN center is 9.9 trillion degrees Fahrenheit. Is what they were able to create without destroying the planet or their facility, for that matter.
How did they even measure that?
I'm not gonna pretend I know how you like. Okay, now it's past 2 trillion. Now we're at 3 trillion.
Okay, guys, let's take it up to 4 trillion.
4 trillion. How are we testing this?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. We're 6 trillion, guys. We're up to 6 trillion. Man, this alien technology is great. What was that? It's like,
Yeah, what kind of tool measures that and doesn't melt? What the fuck?
maybe they're
Oh,
are
it
they,
melted at 10 trillion, guys.
oh,
Sorry.
yeah. So it's like they're calculating heat as a measure of like electron flow through magnetic fields. Maybe
Maybe they're just like looking through space time and they're like, oh, we can see 5 seconds back into the past. That's 5 trillion.
Oh, that would be cool. It's
Like, how do you even?
yeah, no. The sensors are still reading data for 5 seconds after the sensor melts. That's how they calculate it. That's how they got to 5 trillion. They're getting like readings well after the machine stops running.
So the estimates are that it was 1,000 trillion degrees Fahrenheit during the Big Bang. Oh wait, no, 1,000 trillion Celsius. I'm sorry, not even Fahrenheit. Fucking Celsius. Good lord, I don't even know what that would.
1,000
These numbers,
trillion.
man.
I mean, we're back to incomprehensibly large figures.
Hmm.
I mean, they might as well just.
Which it's fun to talk about them just to realize like that shit's happening. Because then you'll hear people be like, "Science is at a bottleneck." Motherfucker, they reached 9.9 trillion degrees in a contained field. Shut up. They're not at a bottleneck in science.
There
You
are
just don't know everything
there are
that's
like
happening.
there are several facilities on Earth right now that have all created stable micro suns, stabilized fission fusion reactions. They're using AI to modulate the control mechanisms to modulate the magnetic fields and lasers to control a resonant fission fusion reaction. China's doing it. Europeans are doing it. I'm sure.
China's is 5 times hotter than the sun, apparently.
Dude, China's runs 5 times hotter than the sun stably for like a couple hours now, I think. It's like incredible if they can just figure out a way to tap that energy and not like, fry their grid. I think it'd be cool to have, the power of 1,000 suns fueling an economy. How cool is that marketing? That's the coolest fucking marketing ever. System X Global, bringing you the power of 10,000 suns every day.
Yeah.
Free energy, brought to you by life. More power than we know what to do with. Our batteries charge themselves. Like, we could... Yeah, the idea that science is running into brick walls, or that particle physics isn't yielding particles, or that theoretical physics is all still too theoretical is like just. I think the tools that are being used are beyond my comprehension. So I know that they're definitely beyond the comprehension of somebody who isn't even interested in this stuff. Like, just the idea that we could measure more than just magnetic flux with a magnetic field. That right there is one of the things that like blew my mind. We were able to send, well, not we, NASA was able to read information from like Voyager 2 after its communications arrays went wonky. They figured out a way. They just sent pulses of data and they decoded it. Like, how fucking smart. Like, that's genius level shit. Taking essentially an ancient computer that's already like at the edge of our solar system and reprogramming shit to make it do things that nobody thought of doing when it was being built. That's like Omega level hacker skills right there. Holy cow.
That's the shit that you find out that they have to do when the technology fails and the person that is behind the technology becomes what they fall back on. That shit is wild. It's happened so many times.
You know, we've got a lot of existing solutions for things that aren't really problems anymore. Like, but we keep getting solutions, like more solutions. And I'm not sure if new solutions are even improvements on existing solutions. They're just different ways to convince people to spend money. I think there might actually be something fundamentally flawed with not just like the consumer culture that is okay with just, you know, the disposable consumer economy. Um, like when I look at my Mazda, it's really kind of difficult actually to get inside it to do anything. When I think like, how am I going to get to this at some point whenever I have to fix it? Do I have to actually take it to a shop for these things? Do I need, you know, what do I need to do? What do I need to learn how to do to like maintain this vehicle? And it's all because everything's all crammed in there. It's all compact, and it's actually quite impressive that these systems can all be packed in as tightly as they are. And then I look at my old truck where I can like climb inside of it practically and reach things through like the wheel well or without removing the wheel even. And, you know, at some point, these things become completely unserviceable by the owner. And I know that there's like a movement of like right to repair stuff, which I think is cool. And I think that there should be it's reasonable to want to be able to repair things that you own or that you've purchased. But I also think it's reasonable that no matter how tech savvy I am, I don't have the necessary tools or even skills to make heads or tails of like vehicle telemetry beyond what the manufacturer provides. Like, what am I going to do with? I mean, I guess I can look at like live data that's being provided by the computer on the vehicle, but what am I really going to do with that other than like diagnose a problem? I can't like reverse engineer the way that the brakes work and improve the brakes, because that's like an entire department and decades worth of knowledge and experience going into those designs. What could I possibly contribute to that as a like backyard mechanic? The answer, of course, is nothing. Other than like
Right.
anecdotal experience, I can literally contribute nothing to that process. I could damage the work that they've accomplished. That's about it.
So it's funny on that note, I've been watching these videos of mechanics where the premise is like customer comes in with problem and they state the problem that they're having, and then they show what was actually going on.
Oh, I love those
And
videos.
then, oh my God, the amount of times that people have tried to fix their own or had somebody else try to fix it. And it's like this horribly welded or duct tape. Some people duct tape their tires, and then it's like you'll see somebody, there's a noise in my engine. Well, there's a fucking cat in your engine. And they pull out live animals
I saw
from the people's engines, like, or there was like rats in somebody's carburetor. There was like a bunch of they pulled off the fucking carburetor lid, and the fucking mama rats hopped up, and the baby rats were just in there sleeping, and they couldn't figure out why the shit wouldn't start.
I watched one of those recently. The customer states changed oil. Now it's running rough, and they want to make sure that like everything was done right. Or no, changed like the transmission fluid. It's running rough. They want to make sure everything was done right. And they get under the car, and there's like liquid gasket, like RTV silicone dripping from the pan. It's very like they used way too much. They used like an entire tube instead of a very thin like bead, and that they smeared around, and then they're like passing the camera around, And lo and behold, they used a wood screw to mount one of the bolts locations. And it's the kind of thing like I would be embarrassed if that was what was going on. I'd be like, man, this is. Oh, I'd
And
like
then
to.
those videos just get worse because then you see somebody tried to replace their own battery and they use like a power drill and screws to secure the battery by fucking screwing it through the fucking nodes. So you're like, how does somebody even have the power tools to make something so Frankenstein and so potentially lethal happen? And then you'll see like, oh, they tried to jumpstart the car backwards. And it's like,
Oh
oh my
wow.
God. These people
I,
that think that they're the ones that can re-engineer the engines that exist end up doing this type of shit.
oh man. So Sheila's brother builds hot rods and supercars, and like that stuff is pretty impressive. They do like fancy body work and do like they bolt together powerful engines and then make them look really beautiful. Give them badass paint jobs, badass exhaust systems, the whole thing, and that's like a level of like modular configuration that requires quite a bit of experience and skill. Like you can't just
And the tool for
and
that
the
matter, and the
tools. Oh yeah,
space.
they've got to
And the permits.
they have a giant ass warehouse. They have a garage warehouse full of tools, like all the tools. They've got lifts. They've got everything. They're like a real deal custom shop, and it's it's incredible to have that kind of access to be able to see like up close, like this is what we do. This is this is how they do it, because on some level, I of course I want to be able to emulate aspects of that for myself, and when like Guinness and I build a vehicle, but there's a part of that where I can tell that there's an extreme limitation that comes with a lack of space, or the lack of certain specialty tools, or just the raw manpower basically. And I'm not like trying to discourage like people who want to repair their own stuff, because I like to repair my own stuff, but it's more like we're very quickly approaching. Oh, here's the other part. Most of these vehicles are old. They're like classic cars. There were a few. I think the newest vehicle was like a BMW, or maybe like there's a Mazda RX-8 in there. There was an RX-7. They had some newer vehicles, but they didn't have like. I think the BMW was the only one that I saw there that had like the full computer control everything type situation. And modern cars are almost completely governed by computers, like electronic fuel pumps and electronic steering pump and electronic cooling fans, and everything's running off of an electrical system, because it puts less strain on the
even
motor.
power steering.
Yeah, everything. It's all run by an electric motor because it's more efficient. Those motors can be smaller now and get the same job done, and they use less energy than running off of the engine. The engine can run more smoothly and produce more power. It's like they a lot of these things have changed, and so a lot of these systems are now computers, or governed by computers and sensors, and that's a whole like technical skill set, like being the IT person for a car essentially.
Well, and then that's where it is like I do discourage people to repair their shit when it comes to anything electrical. Anything strictly mechanical it's not necessarily easy to fix on a car, but once a person starts venturing into electrical repairs, it's like, no, you're probably gonna fuck some shit up. Even down to like, I know how to wire speakers, but I'm not gonna do that shit in my own vehicle because I don't have the proper tools on hand to make sure it's as clean as it possibly can be, because that's the issue when you have like any sort of slack in the wiring or any sort of connection where the
Well, shit, just
grounding is
overlapping
sketchy.
another power line at the wrong angle can induce noise. And then
Yeah,
you're
I
like
mean,
chasing
all
system
kinds of
noise.
shit.
Too
There's
close
all
to any
kinds
kind
of
of
things that can go
motor,
wrong.
you get system noise. I've chased noise down in audio systems in cars before. It's like a nightmare.
Because even then, it's like, I look at the way that my car got wired up for the sound system, and it's like, yeah, I could have done that, but when going to a licensed person, well, okay, let me get this. Like for doing sound systems, they're not necessarily going to be licensed. They're going to have to prove or go through that company's particular process of installation and basically adhere to it. Um, but you basically have to understand circuits and how electricity works to be able to install car sound systems that work. And that's ultimately why it does take some competency with uh,
And that's just to
math
add
and
the
electricity
the
just to be
sound
able to.
system. Like knowing how to
Right.
disassemble all of the panels inside the car and find
Yeah,
the gap
it's a
in the
whole nother.
firewall where the like the that gasket is, and feed your lines through there, from your power to run it back, or no, yeah, to run the power through, if that's where you're going through the vehicle. Or if you're going underneath the vehicle, that's even scarier, because then might have an exposed power line, but then feed.
And then making sure you don't do anything that is a fire hazard
Yeah,
while connecting those things is like.
exactly. Oh man, I've gone so far as to remove seats, like remove the entire interior of vehicles, like the dash even, and remove the carpet so that I can lay lines down and have them be like, you know, invisible. And then of course at the end of it all, it's like, I save myself however much, like peace. I give myself peace of mind, and then I get to put everything back together. But then at the end, it's like, how much of that is actually really worth it? How much time do I spend in the car listening to music anymore? There was a time when I like demanded having like a system in the vehicle at all times. Like I always had to have a system. But lately, I haven't had that desire. It's really strange. I have a subwoofer sitting, you know, behind me. It's got two 10-inch P2s. It's an older system, but it sounded really good. And I just haven't had any like desire to do anything with it. I don't know why.
I mean, part of it though is the music stuff. It's not that it's been stale. I feel like we're in a weird period where people don't know what kind of music to make. Because it's like, do I make escapist party music or do I make aware real music? And it's really difficult, I think, for people to. I mean, not just people, but um, musicians in that sense of like, it's just a weird time to be a musician. I would think, and that's kind of, not to say that like you can't go listen to older music, but then it's like you've already done that. You've listened to the older stuff, so redoing that, it probably gets stale after a certain. And I'm getting a same
Like I'm at a point with certain
type.
tracks that I've listened to them to the point where I'm comfortable saying that I have performed critical analysis of certain tracks, that like these become my test tracks for evaluating like systems, or just making sure that my levels are set on my monitors so that I'm hearing everything right. Like it's really challenging because there's so much music out there, and it's even trusted sources of music are, I think they're starting to suffer like overload of what's out there. Like the curators of music genres and cultures are even like finding it difficult to maintain those standards, I think. And like I find myself losing interest in some of my favorite long term sources of electronic music because either their buyers are really only into one style and I'm not into it, or tastes all change. We're all allowed to have shifting interests and change in our taste in music and all that stuff too. And I'm not trying to discourage that either. But it's just really, I don't know, maybe this is part of the whole like maturation process. And it's like, this is my brain's way of telling me, it's like, hey, you need to find something new to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, and I wonder also if that's part of the weird time. It's like when we grew up listening to drum and bass at its peak creative moment, being, and the issue is,
Well, not just
I
peak
think
creative, but peak experimental. I think they're still writing like
it,
peak
yeah.
creativity, but peak experimentation is definitely not a thing.
Oh well, and that's what I mean. I think it is peak creativity in the sense of like when you stop experimenting because there's like a mainstream desired goal, then anything that's experimental starts not becoming drum and bass at this point, which
Yeah.
is where I'm like, I feel like the same type of creative wall happens in things that aren't just music. But I guess what I'm getting at is part of it was also we didn't have 100 gig internet where we could download everything. So even our access to online stuff was limited by our bandwidth. So we couldn't really get everything even. So we really, I think there was a benefit to having information speed filters, but the problem becomes you don't know when it becomes a content filter. So it's like then you don't know if you're missing out because someone's hiding something from you. So that's where I think in the pursuit of discovering everything, I mean, not trying, it's like we try to find the best music. It's like for right now, there's nothing novel enough to catch attention to be like, oh, let me set up the subwoofer.
Yeah.
Like it's just not there right now for whatever reason. And maybe it's because the artists are uninspired or because they've hit a creative wall because everybody has a fucking MPC or Reason or Soundforge or whatever, and we've just made too much music too fast.
I remember a few years ago, one of my buddies said that they were just done with boom bap sounds. And at the time, it
Yeah,
didn't really occur to me what that even meant.
I'm done with boom bap for the most part.
Yeah, and you're like not the you and them and several other people have all basically said the same thing. It's like, yeah, I'm done with that. It's done. And it made me wonder. It's like, for a while there was an extreme fetishization of like 808 sounds. Like people just blurt out 808 in a song, even when they weren't using like the characteristic 808 sound at all. Or sometimes it wasn't even an 808. It was like
Well,
a sine wave over a different bass kick. Like,
ironically, boom bap is like not really heavy on 808,
no, I know,
like
but
at
that's
all.
what I mean. It's like but even just in general, there was a like in mainstream like pop music, 808s got fetishized, and they even in songs where they didn't use the 808, and here's this like genre of hip hop or this style sound of hip hop that has its own thing, and they still search for that boom. It's always there. It's not quite as it's not quite an 808. It's like this extra bass, like an extra huge bass. But it doesn't translate unless you have a gigantic subwoofer or a very capable subwoofer system. It just doesn't. And I've only ever heard it at events, like live events where they have real big sound reinforcement, or in someone's car when they have a real serious system. And I wonder, like,
Well, and that's part of what you're hearing is that itself is the equalization in that system causing that sound. It's not some that's why I don't even like boom bap mostly. Is like because there's no real 808. Anytime you actually get the booming sound, it's only because of the system in which you're listening to it having some sort of equalization problem, because it's not usually supposed to sound like that. Because one of the big things about boom bap is they usually use live instrumentation.
Yeah.
It's usually jazzy. It's usually kick drum, and it's usually like sampled. So there's like not 808s almost ever in boom bap, and that's like, you'll hear it ever so often, but even then, the patterns that boom bap uses for the kick drum is why I don't like it, but it doesn't translate well to 808 like overlay. Because what happens in hip hop is the 808 will often be overlaid with the kick drum, so you can't really tell which one is which. So when you're listening to the kick drum, it sounds more full because of the 808, but then when you listen to the 808, it sounds more of the pop because of the kick drum on the front. The way the envelopes work, the kick drum is needed to really
I've seen
pop the
dozens
bass
of
the
tutorials
808.
that all describe how to emulate the 808 sound with like a sine waves or a just a bass sound. And I think a lot of what we hear isn't actually an 808 at all. I'm actually of the mind that
It's not.
very
Yeah.
few people have actually heard a physical 808. Like, there might be a bunch of people who've listened to like techno or house music who can definitely say that with assurance they've been to a live PA event and heard an 808. But I'm willing to wager that most people who listen to mainstream music and recorded music have never actually heard one, and what they're hearing is just an emulation or an imitation of 808 with the knowledge of how that sound itself is created. And so we've got this like fetishized sound that doesn't actually sound the way that the real instrument itself sounds. And so it's like the fetishization of the instrument itself is what provides some kind of like it's an anchor point. It says, oh yeah, 808. Now you can associate it with this like culture of fetishizing the instrument as a part of the sound when it's not there. Like a lot of techno is built off of 909s, not 808s. And there's a whole universe of drum machines that have been used throughout like the entirety of recorded music after the introduction of synthesizers that very few people nobody can identify, like, except for like producers who have like discrete hands-on experience with these devices, because after they get processed, they don't sound anything like they do straight out of the machine itself. And then introduce sampling, and then generation losses from sampling, and then bit decay as a result of generation loss, and it's not even it's just it's a shadow of itself by the time that we get to the speaker as the consumer. I just don't think anyone's actually ever heard one.
Well, and part of it is, I think, in the rush to try to reproduce the sounds, the individual parts got chopped up, or people would make their own patches and then sell them. And then that rush to try to like be, I want to sound like Skrillex, or I want to sound like fucking Downlink, or whatever. People would be like, I want this certain sound, and then they would buy sample packs that would try to reproduce it, or reproduce it, but not realizing it was a combination of things that got to the original sound. And then in the process, this is where I feel as if all of the musicians ended up becoming formulaic because they're all chasing a sound, and the next subsequent generation doesn't even know what sound is being chased. Um,
Well, the current generation of nostalgia synthesizers are trying to tap into like people our generation and a little older who may have been aware of these foundation level synthesizers and want to dabble. And I've dabbled with a few of them, and most of them sound like absolute crap until you process the living hell out of them, and then they start sounding cool. But what I've come to realize is that aside from like the tactile interface and the immediacy of reprogramming a synthesizer, I haven't encountered any kind of sonic advantage. In fact, I've encountered like the opposite. I've encountered nothing but disadvantages of having outboard synthesizers because of just the flexibility of doing it all inside of a computer. And it's really weird because I've fluctuated between like wanting to do everything in the box and wanting to have outboard hardware and wanting to have standalone processing. And some things standalone processing is absolutely superior, like with instruments or with voice. It is, without question, standalone processing doesn't fail unless it doesn't work. Whereas a computer might just freak out for who knows why. It might decide that it's going to run some kind of, you know, background script within the DAW that's like, oh no, hold on, we're going to do something, just got to wait. Hardware doesn't do that to you. But like a synthesizer, like a digital synthesizer, uh, like my Yamaha, it does frequency modulation. Aside from the interface, which makes it very easy to change everything really quickly, like almost this, the speed of touch, um, it doesn't sound different to me. It doesn't There's no like real improvement in like, I mean, I can hear the difference between like a piano sample, a multi-sampled piano. Yamaha's multi-sampled piano is beautiful sounding. It responds to all sorts of nuanced touch. And then Reason has a really complex multi-sampled piano for NN19 or NNXT, and it's very similar. It practically breathes when you touch it, and the only real difference is one of them is a computer that I have configured most everything, and the other is a computer that Yamaha configured everything. But there's no real like, it's just in like the tactile interface that the improvement is realized. So I'm not sure if it's like, if we're chasing sounds that might have existed, it only helps if we know what those things actually sounded like. Otherwise, it's just this like abstraction of, oh yeah, this is the the morning goose sound that you heard on so and so's recording that everyone loves, but no one actually knows how to program it. Or no, like you alluded to, it's the reality that it was the combination of several different instruments working together, interacting with each other and influencing each other, that resulted with that outcome, with that sound, and that it can't really be encapsulated within one synthesizer because that one synthesizer wasn't doing all the work. Like no one thing really does all the work. Except maybe no, even the sequencer can't do all the work because it's not the synthesizer.
yeah, and that's kind of what made me stop producing music. Is like that whole thing where people don't actually know the difference, and then you have people just buying riffs and buying sounds, and then where if someone's like making their own synthesizers and then somebody just comes in and buys the Skrillex pack, and then all of a sudden that person is mainstream because they just bought the Skrillex pack and used a couple loops, and they just copied the formula. It got really frustrating in that I wasn't doing it for
Man,
exposure or anything, but then it's like after a while, it's like what's even the purpose
Is it
if
really as easy as buying this like a serum brostat pack?
oh yeah.
Oh man, that just makes me sad.
I mean, that's why it's like so terrible because just people buying. I mean, there's like the Vienna Symphonic
Oh, I know.
library
Yeah,
pack.
it's
It's like
huge.
yeah, it was like $7,000 when it was originally out. So it may be maybe $3,000 now, or maybe more. I don't know if this version, like if they kept doing it, like how the pricing worked. But that's where a lot of the film soundtracks you would hear would use the Vienna Symphonic Library to get those like really
Just extra
high
rich.
quality. Yeah,
Yeah,
because the samples were
made with the highest quality conversion with
as
top
the
flight
highest quality possible.
everything.
and
Everything was
and
top
that's why they
flight.
cost seven grand.
So it was
But
recorded with a
then
$50,000 signal chain on every instrument.
exactly.
The mic
So
alone that
that's
they used was
where
worth $20,000.
easy,
Yeah.
easy. And it's shit like that where you look at it and you're like, okay, that's the difference between a $7,000 sample pack and a $200 sample pack. And people want the $7,000 quality for $200, and then at the end of the day, the audience can barely tell. So the issue
What,
becomes like, if you can, the problem is if you can just cut a sample and pay a small royalty, it's easier to do that than compose something from scratch on a $7,000 sample pack. So people just kept on doing the
well,
samples
you
that
just you
and the
just
paying the
reminded me of
royalties.
something that like, I've spent a good deal of money on like high quality monitors, but I always run into the brick wall that I don't have like a sufficient acoustic solution for my monitoring environment. And so I'm always at odds with this. I have to run impulses periodically and take measurements of the space I use because it also evolves with me as I work on things. And so being aware of the way the room works, I can compensate for these things as I make decisions on mix or the final output. But I'm also being really neurotic about that, and I don't think that everyone is going to be taking regular measurements with their decibel meter or running impulses and watching spectrum analysis of their room because that's an involved process. It's like exercise. And so if not everyone is going to do that, or they aren't going to invest in acoustic treatment for their space, there's no way that they can reliably hear the difference between Vienna Symphonic Orchestra sample pack or the entry level free Studio Logic symphony orchestra that you can just get for free. And there's nothing wrong with that one because it sounds fine. But if you can't hear the difference, it doesn't matter. Of course, the cheaper solution is better because it's free or it's only $200. And really, in most cases, the only time that anyone's actually going to be able to hear the difference is if they're using, you know, top shelf conversion in a treated room with calibrated monitoring. And no one has that. That's like the realm of facilities and actual studios. So we have to trust that the samples were recorded properly. And so with like Vienna Symphonic, we can tell because they tell us exactly what facility they used and the hardware that was used down to the signal chain. But those assurances aren't always made. Sometimes samples are created from other sample libraries, like pre-existing sample libraries through licensing. Or they have incomplete sampler mappings. So, they might have overlap within velocity layers, or they might have insufficient coverage of samples to cover the range that they're trying to use. And I know that a lot of there was a lot of attention paid to the high-end sample packs, like sample libraries, like especially when they're dedicated to like a single instrument. But some of those are like $200 for a single instrument, and that makes sense if you're like, you know, an instrumentalist and you are, you know, a student of that instrument and are attempting to like unlock the real creative power or that instrument would provide. But how many people are going to actually take the time to learn, you know, a vast library of instruments intimately enough to make real use of them? Or are we just to assume that because somebody has like a background in composition, that compositions will just work themselves out? Because I think that's still why an orchestra requires humans to play those instruments, because it requires that subtle human touch that still can't be programmed. Or, I mean, some composer might be crazy and might actually play out every part, but I'm pretty sure that's what the computer's for, the sequencer. This is tough.
Well, once they started automating swing, that's when shit started to get real complicated.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm like, at first it was terrible, but it got much better. Because it would just be the original, like the first attempts, they would just quantize a track and then move it by like,
Yeah, they would just nudge things a little.
yeah, just a nanosecond. I mean, maybe like 4 nanoseconds or something. Because it was beyond. I think it was beyond milliseconds the way they had it like possible.
Yeah, time domain mixing is at the time domain mixing is really cool. I've only seen a few mixers that actually do it like in hardware. It's more common in software, I think. But it allows for very subtle adjustments in the arrival time of a signal. And so you can actually create depth within a sound stage by turning a knob now. So like pan in conjunction with time domain, you can now physically place objects in the soundstage, forward and back and left and right. And if one has access to Dolby Atmos, they can mix things up and down now too. Shit's insane now. Like, I remember the good old days when all you needed was right and left. Now we've got like 10 channels with 2 low frequency effects channels and time domain mixing. It's truly an exciting era for sound reproduction. It's just unfortunate that everything is like samples and presets. I really like seeing a live drummer
for a while.
Like, I really like seeing live keyboard players and live bass players and live guitar players. I like live instruments. It's exciting to watch people who are like so dedicated to that one thing. They're like, that they, you know, speak through it with the same ease that people who are, you know, claim to be fluent in English can communicate. It's really impressive stuff. And when I see like performances like of modern music, they have bands in the background, but half the time they look like they're pantomiming. I've played guitar all my life. I know when I see somebody playing the guitar and it doesn't look right. and I maybe could like some of these things could be accounted for with like audio or video delay, like at the performance level, and that hasn't been corrected at the booth. But generally, those kind of events are so important that all these issues are resolved well in advance. Like I don't think I can remember actually seeing like a performance of where the lights and the backup dancers and the choreography of the backline singers didn't all sync up. Like it's all so choreographed now.
Yeah, you kind of have to be really, otherwise you become a meme moment, and I think that's where it ultimately people are afraid of becoming memes, so everything becomes so rehearsed and
You know, that's how I know that none of those
prepared.
people are actually rock stars because rock stars don't give a fuck about that shit. You know,
I mean,
we were
I
blessed
don't
with
I don't know
and
if
also
that's true. I think
tormented by rock stars that didn't give a shit though. So it's like
we were
double
made to
edged.
believe that, but then fucking Lars comes back and sues Napster. So all this
That's
we don't
true.
give a shit is bullshit. All those rockers, once they stop getting the checks as quickly, they start giving a shit. So it was all just a temporary lie.
Yeah.
And that's where it's the same shit with hip hop too. You see these people like once they get to a point where the records aren't selling anymore, it's like, oh, well, I'll go country. I'll become a cop on television. It's like, well, I guess that whole gangster thing was a lie.
I mean, Hootie went country too after the Blowfish kind of fizzled. My understanding is that Darius Rucker as a country artist is like like vastly more successful. But they always sounded like a country band.
Yeah, I never, I didn't discern them between country and not, but now it's like much more clear that they weren't country when he wasn't country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, this person's car, it honks like multiple times a day. And I just don't understand. Like,
Are they
this gets back to that person, this is the type of person who shows up on uh, the fucking customer states videos where they're like, customer states alarm kept going off. And then you realize like they like sleep with their keys in their pocket or some stupid shit. And it's like,
or the customer states alarm goes off whenever they press this button on their fob. And it turns out it's like the
right.
alarm button.
Yeah.
They're habitually like pressing the lock and unlock buttons to make sure that the car is locked all the time. You know what's funny about that is if with a lot of these hydraulic systems they use to the actuators, if you press the lock button too many times and it attempts to actuate the lock too many times, it will pressurize the system, and then you'll have to wait for the pressure to bleed out until it'll unlock.
I'm not surprised.
I've seen it
There's
happen.
so many random, yeah.
Like,
Okay, so my car it's like a 22-year-old car, and it has a function where if you hold down the unlock button, the windows roll down. Well, this is useful sometimes,
it seems
but
like
most
something
of
to
the
get you in
time
trouble.
it's really inconvenient because it also undoes the fucking sunroof. So it's like you accidentally do that shit and it starts raining and you didn't even realize your shit's open. But anyway, well, it turns out Americans are so fucking stupid. They turned off the close option on the fob in case somebody stuck their head in it and fucking died and got. So you can, in the British version, it's unlocked, but in the American version, it's locked because Americans are so fucking stupid that they were worried that if they accidentally rolled it down, they might accidentally roll it back up with their heads back in. And I'm like, it's shit like that where I'm like,
So I had a Volkswagen where if I put the key in the lock and I locked the car and held it in the locked position, it would roll the windows up. But that's kind of like the opposite. That's like a physically got to be there kind of thing.
I'm starting to think what needs to happen in driver's education is that people have to prove they know how cars work. Then you won't have somebody driving around never putting or even checking their oil, or like the person that puts 30 liters of oil into their vehicle not understanding why they won't start up.
It's full of oil.
It's like I as we stated earlier, I don't have the capacity for many reasons to like build a car from scratch, let alone be trying to design one. There are certain things on the car I can fix myself, but as I said earlier, I draw the line when it comes to electrical shit.
Yeah.
Because that's like the easiest line to draw, where it's like, okay, here you really have no business trying to fix your own shit.
And it's not like
I said, for
unplugging
various
a
reasons.
module and plugging a new one in. That's
No, that's not
that's not it at all.
that's not an electrical fix. That's a
That's just swapping out a
modular
component.
fix that's already prepared for someone to easily fix. And that's where I'm like, that doesn't even fall under what I'm talking about, because this is where it's the same shit with homes. Like, I've wired many doorbells, but I draw the line at running wires through the walls because I'm not licensed to do that. And people would like ask me to do shit like that. I'm like, no, you don't want anybody who's not licensed to do that. I don't care if they said they would. You don't want that, because that's how your shit catches on fire. I've wired many things, but never for other people outside of what is legally allowed, because like I said, I'm not about to be the one responsible, but it's irresponsible for other people to then ask somebody else to do some shit that they're not licensed to do. And then you see how many people do it anyway. And that's where I'm like, on the one hand, I understand the quote unquote freedom to want to be able to drive a vehicle. But on the other hand, the fact that vehicles do represent a threat to other people's safety when driven irresponsibly, there is a gap between how much people really don't understand about how their vehicles work when they're trying to operate them, which is why they then become just moving hazards. Like they're hazards that everybody has to try to avoid.
So recently, there have been efforts to reduce to require that interstate trucks, all semis actually, have speed limiters, governors that can be set like remotely. And of course, the trucking industry there's a backlash. Some transit companies already have limiters built into their systems, and so certain trucks you see, I don't know which ones, like, you know, Schneider comes to mind, but I can't be certain that they use limiters. But that, as an example, like a company like that would have a limiter on their system anyways, because they're already functioning with advice from, you know, research groups and insurance companies to say, yeah, by reducing speed, we can improve, like, you know, safety and reduce maintenance costs overall, you know, reduce the total cost of ownership of the vehicle over time while still meeting these certain commitments and goals of the contracts and all that stuff. So it's possible to do it through management of logistical management. But of course, there are smaller companies that rely on, you know, running at this absolute speed limit and doing things almost, you know, practically down to the wire, it seems. And they don't want that, because they cite similar research that indicates that if the safest speed of travel is the 80th percentile, like whatever 80% of the traffic is traveling at is the safest speed. And that if cars are going to be zipping around slower moving trucks, that creates a dangerous situation, when the reality is they've just highlighted the actual problem that small vehicles are driving too fast. Like, I've for the past couple of months, I've been, actually for a lot longer than that, I've been very keen on watching, you know, car wreck videos, like Idiots in Cars. Fail Army on YouTube has a bunch of them. They're brilliant. And, you know, oftentimes you see, it's always someone driving too fast that gets into an accident. They're flying into into traffic. And oftentimes it's someone at the end of the group of traffic who's just minding their own business, trying to be safe, who, you know, receives the brunt of that irresponsibility of that idiot driving too fast. And, you know, it's like this giant continuum that isn't being realized, I think, during or it's not being reinforced during the process of owning and operating vehicles. Like, people are in a hurry, they want to get somewhere fast, they don't care what other people are doing or why they're driving the way they are, they need to get around them. Like, there's something wrong when all of the science points to, like, hey, if we need to slow down to make things safer. And
it's flawed science. It's flawed science, and these vehicles should never be on the same road.
They shouldn't,
for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
First off, we're talking about interstate trucks sharing highways with intrastate travelers, which is why the intrastate travelers seem to be in a rush, because they're going from like home to the fucking dentist's office to pick up their daughter, but they have to use the highway because the local roads are not built for quick movement because they were designed in like 1925 or some dumb shit. So then it's like our science is based on roads that were built in 1925 with semi trucks and cars that were built using technology from the 2000s that still have to then share the road with each other, when it's like the only reason we have to slow down is because these two vehicles have dramatically different stopping times.
Oh,
like, you know what I mean?
Tens and tens upon tens of thousands of pounds of, 10 times the weight. A 5,000 pound car versus a 50,000 pound truck. I mean, like in some,
why they shouldn't be sharing the same roads.
Like I've
this is like
in some of those videos when they show what happens to a car when it just happens to bump one of the wheels of a semi, it completely flips the car over because the wheel of the semi grabs it and tosses it, just the side of it. Like, it's violent as hell. The car will flip over and who knows what. If it's close to other cars, it could hit other cars. If it's close to a wall, it hits a wall. If it's next to a railing, it could go over the railing. Like, driving next to a semi is, like, the physics alone should be enough to give people caution. But I'm sure that we've all seen someone just casually, like, driving right next to that semi, just kind of like weaving back and forth in the lane right next to the fucking semi. But at the same time, I'm not.
Well, and the issue is, again, semis are the problem because I've been in that specific situation.
And you can't move.
Going around a curve on the highway that was an overpass. So I'm like, I have no choice but to try to get past this semi. Well, the fucking trailer starts to drift.
Yep.
So I'm like, oh, fuck. What do I do? Because at this point, the trailer had started to drift into my lane, and the fucking driver doesn't see it because his cab is in his lane still, but it's the trailer that's drifting.
Yep.
So he doesn't even know this shit is happening. So I just luckily have enough horsepower to speed up. Like, I had to brake first, but then I had to speed up to get out of the way. So it's like, if I wasn't aware of my surroundings, that shit would have knocked me into the wall and probably over it, like 20 feet below. Because I've seen stories of that specific thing happening, and knowing how close it got to happen to me, that's where I'm like, it's not the speed, it's the fucking semis, period.
Yeah.
Semis are the danger. Those motherfuckers can just get hit by wind because they're so broad and poorly designed that the wind gets too strong and it's fucking blowing semis over. So that's where I'm like, the semi is the problem. They need, if we're going to continue to use this such poorly designed infrastructure, they need their own routes, in their own interstate routes, so that we're not trying to share them with fucking 2,000-pound vehicles. Especially when we as individuals are being like, oh, you need a smaller, more efficient vehicle because we've destroyed the fucking environment. Well, now I've got this like tiny ass plastic car that's a fucking hybrid, soon to be electric, that now I have to drive along with this fucking diesel truck next to me. Really? This makes no sense. I'm supposed to drive slower because this diesel truck is still allowed to be on the fucking road? That makes no sense. And this is where I get frustrated to have the responsibility put on me as like the person who's trying to move around, because then that restricts my fucking movement.
Yeah.
Trying to drive between Bloomington, Indianapolis is fucking impossible because of all the goddamn semis taking up the goddamn highway. Every time I try to go visit my mom in a city that's supposed to be like 35, 40 minutes away, it might take me 90 minutes because of the goddamn interstate semis using the same road to get to fucking Chicago. They're not even coming through here. They're not even coming here. So it's super frustrating when the semis get the preference in a system where they took away our fucking railroad. Like if I had the option to take a train to Indianapolis, I would have done it, but they took it away.
You know, the thing about the interstate that I always thought was surreal was that they run directly into cities instead of being, 10 miles away from a city. Like, I mean, small towns, of course, you have to drive on a state road or a highway to get to the interstate. But the idea of living right next to the interstate, like, I mean, I'm a couple miles away from the interstate, but I have to get there on city streets, county roads type situation, and I still have to get on the highway to get to the interstate. Like,
the thing I hate most about the interstate is that most of them were eminent domain displaced black communities that were not necessarily always prosperous, but black people owned land and they had homes. So then these motherfuckers, we need a national highway. I'm just going to go through the black neighborhoods. And that's where a lot of the black land ownership got just stolen by the state. And now you got these motherfuckers acting like black people never own land because they built a fucking shitty ass highway infrastructure over it and then erased the history and made it so people couldn't learn about that part. That's why I'm so like the interstate system, and it's basically now used as a way to restrict movement instead of enable movement. Like the way that they use construction. This is a prison. This is a prison system. We can't use our interstate system to actually move around. Go try to drive to the next city. It takes like 4 times longer than it's supposed to. I don't care who's listening, where you're at, because it's going to be the same in every fucking city because our interstate system has been weaponized against us using fucking construction. Because then you try to speed, guess what? You got $1,000 ticket now. You try to do a little, they got construction up. There's no construction happening right now, but the cops are around to give you that fucking ticket. So you thought you'd go a little 5 miles over the speed limit because you're down to 1 lane and the fucking cones are up, but there's no construction happening now because it's a Sunday and you go 5 miles. But the cop got you. Now you're in a shitty mood. You're still stuck in traffic. So you might as well just turn around and go back home and figure out how you're going to pay that $1,000 ticket.
Plus,
that is how
they leave the fucking lights on at night when there's clearly no construction.
Right.
The blinker.
That's what I mean. Dude, this is a scam.
Yeah.
This whole thing is a scam because I've traveled enough around the country to see that it's happening every fucking city. There's not one city where this isn't happening. They have basically used construction to restrict movement at the entrances and exits to every fucking major city in this country. People just haven't traveled enough to see it. They just think it's happening in their city. No, this is happening all across the country. The same way travel restrictions got placed on Americans. Americans don't know enough about history to understand when travel restrictions happen. That's basically like a national prison being created. And then there's the caste system in which upper caste people can move within that because they can pay around the paywalls, but even they run into access problems at some point because the money runs out. So you start to see shit where it's like, there's even Elon can't acquire Twitter. Elon thought he could do anything. This motherfucker reached the limit of his social and leveraged capital in in the most public way. Now we know the limits of Elon's power or whatever. He has so much mythological power, but now we know the limit of it. There is a point at which money can't buy you that thing, and he hit it. He's hit it.
Well, he also just violated his NDA with Twitter. He just disclosed a bunch of information about their algorithm.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say if the deal hasn't been closed and NDA hasn't been signed. So the idea that he violated NDA, I don't think that's true. Especially like I've signed multiple NDAs, and the issue is if you actually violate an NDA on that scale, like the lawsuit would have already been drafted. So on the one hand, like if there was an NDA drafted that he violated that was not signed by both parties, that's not the same as him violating an NDA that has been signed by both parties.
Yeah,
so
but
I can believe.
But he said that that Twitter lawyers Twitter representatives said that he violated the NDA. He was the one that said that.
Of course they're gonna. I mean, what I'm saying is, of course they're going to say that at this point to try to like what's happening right now is public manipulation of sentiment for the market to move the stock price. Like if it appears that Twitter is in a worse situation than they are, their stock's going to go even lower, which is going to make it easier for Elon to renegotiate a deal at a better price. Conversely, if Twitter has more control over the deal than Elon is letting on, and then he's trying to make them look bad by saying all these things publicly, and they're like, hey, he's violating an NDA by doing this, but even though he said that, this stuff isn't accurate anyway. So this is where the public sentiment about what is happening between them is more about the manipulation of the Twitter stock price. So that's where I'm like, knowing, like, again, I've signed multiple NDAs. If he actually violated an NDA that was signed by both parties, he'd be getting sued for so much money that the deal would definitely be off, but further Tesla would start to tank too. So that's where I'm like, because this is the issue.
I mean, isn't Tesla already like under fire right now with the recall?
Yeah, but the issue is if he violates an NDA that both parties have signed, when at least $44 billion is on the line because of the deal that's in place, they could sue for damages for potentially double or triple that amount. So then Tesla could be on the hook, or Elon and Tesla by proxy, for potentially $112 billion because he said the wrong thing. And if that's the case, he's been doing that so frequently that it could tremendously impact the shareholder perception of the competency of Tesla's leadership. And that could start to dump, and everything, like whenever he went on Joe Rogan and was smoking weed, and like people were like texting him like, please don't smoke weed on camera and blah blah, this makes you look horrible. He's constantly had people in his shareholder group trying to censor his behavior and censor what he does. If he actually really violated an NDA that had been signed by Twitter and him, and it was like a full-on sealed NDA, and that was like the precursor to them getting to the next stage, there's going to be such a huge cascade of loss of trust in his leadership that it will definitely tank the Tesla price. But this is something that he will not reputationally be able to recover from, because the people that were the shareholders in his corner have been trying to stop him from doing things like that for a long time, which is why that's where I'm like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm slightly skeptical that both parties had signed the NDA. I definitely believe that he violated terms of an NDA that had not been actually secured or put in a position where both parties had signed it. But if it's like a full-on non-disclosure agreement that has been like reviewed by both lawyers and both parties have signed the same copy, it's like such a bigger deal to the market than, because basically he'd be caught
manipulating the market.
Yeah, and this is something he's been under fire for and under investigation for since the secured funding at 420. The SEC investigated him then, but didn't find that he was lying because of the way that he was able to prove that they had secured a deal, but the deal didn't go through. So his tweet was not completely false because he was vague enough that they were able to say, oh, even though the deal fell through, he legitimately believed at the time there was a deal in place. So knowing that that's obviously complete bullshit, if he, because of there was a clause in place that if the Tesla stock price dropped 40%, then he'd have to pay off the full balance of the deal to make sure that the Twitter didn't lose any money on the trade. So that started to happen. So if he intentionally starts to try to tank Twitter's stock price in order to keep the ratio between Tesla's value and Twitter's stock price at a point where he's not then on the hook for the entire balance, but Twitter calls him out because they had an NDA in place and he broke it, that's a huge, like, I don't think he's smart enough to not fuck up at some point, but this would be the major fuck up that really brings down the Elon empire. And that's where I'm like, I'm not, if it is, I'm here for it, but I'm like, I don't feel like the universe is fair enough right now to actually, like, I feel like old crusty Elon is gonna get away again, and he didn't have his signature on it, even though Twitter, so he didn't actually, because if he really violated that NDA, whoo,
so do you think
it'd be different if it was a small company.
Do you think the world is ready for the Twitter Model S or the Twitter Model 3 or the Twitter Model Y?
No, because when he tried to focus group test it, everybody's like, what are you doing? We're not going to pay for viral tweets. We're not going to pay for fucking ad-free accounts. Every time he tweeted about some shit he thought about trying, people were like, no. So then he comes in and starts shitting on the platform altogether to tank the price. I mean, wasn't he just wanting to buy it last week? Why is he talking shit about the algorithm? Did you not do enough investigation into the algorithm before putting a fucking bid on it? Because that's kind of irresponsible.
I mean, he is a shareholder, but he doesn't own the company. Maybe as a shareholder, he had to sign an NDA. Maybe there was already an NDA in place before the acquisition attempt because, you know, he bought whatever, 10th of the company or something, or 20%.
Oh, you might be right about that one,
because
that's not out of the realm, that specific one, and he might not have thought about that because he was going to have to sign another one. So he's like in his head thinking, oh, I haven't broken this NDA, when he forgot. See, that's the type of fuck up I can totally imagine Elon making.
I mean, that's
like
the
that
kind of
specific
that's
type
the
of
kind of
fuck up.
fuck up that normal people just trying to do everything right end up making. Like when they sign new contracts, like it's you gotta bump up old contracts against new ones if you want to make sure that you're not getting yourself into trouble in a lot of cases, especially in the tech industry.
Yeah. Well, I know whenever I was like head of security, I would like make people sign NDAs if they're going to see anything about the inner workings of the organization. It's like, hey, if you need to see anything behind this, then you got to sign an NDA, period, just because I don't know what this person's intentions are. So that's where I'm like, we had a tiny ass organization, let alone Twitter. So I'm sure he, like you said, he probably signed something
There's
when he
probably like an
became
NDA
a
built
10%.
into the contract when he took ownership of his shares.
Right, so that people can't buy shares and short them
Yeah.
with misinformation. Oh, that specific thing is probably such a clause where, like you said, he might have violated that shit, not knowing what he did because he didn't bother to read the fine print of the clause that came with the first acquisition.
Man, it's like the whole culture of read the fucking manual has been wasting
Yep.
its breath this whole time, but here we are. Just another reminder to read the fucking manual every time. It saves so many problems. You know what? I learned how to adjust lash on lifters of my weed eater because I read the manual. Like, it's amazing what you can learn by just reading a little bit.
Well, and again, it's like there's limits. Like I charged the AC on the car, or I replaced the regulator in the window. Like there's the mechanical part that holds up the window, and it's like I can replace the mechanical part, but I'm not gonna fuck with the electrical part.
Yeah.
Because even then, I don't have all the pieces to do the mechanical part correctly. I just had to do it because the fucking window came down before it was about to start raining, so I like had to. Otherwise, I would just had to either get an interior wet vehicle or put a trash bag over
Yeah,
it.
there's no amount of trash bags that can actually protect a vehicle.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's that's just wishful thinking.
It definitely doesn't work.
I had a window that wouldn't go down one time. I bought the actuator, and I disassembled the door, and man, I reached my hands inside of a door with all these sharp edges in it, and I unbolted everything, got the thing out, and the whole thing. And so I've got to take the actuator off. And it's this little electric motor holding this spring-loaded thing with teeth. And, I'm about to get it undone, and I tap out the last bolt, and then the entire armature, this like scissor lift looking thing, snaps shut because it's spring-loaded. Like, that's the kind of thing that could take off a finger, no problem. Like,
oh yeah,
like
easily,
just like
easily.
it would be so fast you wouldn't even notice it until you saw the blood squirt, and then probably pass out type situation. But we managed to pry the thing into position and install it correctly, and then I fed the thing back in and mounted the windows, and lo and behold, it all worked. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. No one got hurt. I didn't get cut up, but it was just one of those things that, like, every step of the way, it's like, this thing could fucking hurt me so bad.
Yeah, everything in the vehicle is under pressure or electrical charge
or sharp.
And that's where I'm like, yeah.
And rusty too, like rusty and sharp. That's like asking for trouble. There's so many things about it that, like, I mean, it's very rewarding. I've learned a lot about, just the tolerances of steel within the framework of vehicle maintenance. And I think it's important to understand, like, how to maintain the vehicle, because I use it regularly, and I want it to last. I don't want to have a disposable vehicle. I don't like the idea of a disposable vehicle. I don't really like the idea of disposable products, but I accept that in a lot of ways, like, what am I going to do? Collect jars or bottles of milk? And then, like, what our recycling system is a joke. China stopped buying plastic and glass from us. But at the same time, we're at this really
critical point within like human material research and material revolution and discovery, where we have all the potential to make these alloys and these new materials that give us greater whatever, and we're not doing everything that we can to ensure the longevity of the actual limited number of resources that we have on Earth and our ability to access those resources.
Well, that it's in conflict with the notion of scarcity being valuable and needing to restrict access to create value or create artificial scarcity to amass wealth. And that definitely is at odds with like sustainable means of growth. Or not, it doesn't have to be growth. It has to be just persistence.
All of these things are at odds with each other, though. It's like we want to have the future of sustainable resources and materials, but those things can't actually be achieved with the consumer mindset of scarcity, because scarcity exists no matter what. We can't just there's only so much cobalt on Earth, and that was determined by that great big ball of fire in the sky, like billions of years ago. We don't have a say in how much cobalt we have. We don't have a say in how much lithium is available. We do have the ability to go, in theory, harvest like iridium from asteroids. In theory, we might be able to, but we've never done it. Nobody's ever actually grabbed a rock from space and brought it back. They've brought back dust samples. Worthless ass dust samples. But we learned that we can harpoon a rock in space from a satellite, so that's worth something.
Yeah,
we could have had like science could have used those resources to develop viable technologies or new materials for Earth-based projects that would have a meaningful return. No, we're gonna go look at this rock in space that we think is loaded with gold and see if we can stick a harpoon in it. It's whaling on the moon. I mean, it'd be really nice, if all of the aluminum was reclaimed and able to be recycled, and a lot of it is. And it'd be nice if we could do the same with glass. And it's expensive, and they can make the glass back into new glass, and they can recycle plastics and use them again and again and again. The industries, it's possible to do all of these things, but it costs money. And why should we care when it's cheaper just to, build new glass or build new plastics or metal or whatever to extrude it now? And who gives a fuck about 50 to 1,000 years from now, because those people will be dead and they won't have to suffer with everyone else. I think that's like the prevailing mindset. Everyone who's here right now on Earth in this moment, half of them are going to be gone in 50 years or less. And then another half will have replaced them with new humans. And there'll be even more humans probably in 50 years than there are right now anyways. There has to be some kind of change, though. There's no way that with any kind of growth projects or projections for population that we're going to run into the brick wall of energy production. We're going to run into a brick wall of being able to distribute food. We're going to run into the brick wall of not enough water. There's a lot of brick walls here. Eventually it becomes like a box, and we're in a prison of scarcity. And it's not artificial. It's real scarcity because of mismanagement. So a few assholes could fly up into low orbit, not even low orbit, and pretend to be astronauts.
Yeah, it's like we're totally hitting the brick wall really quickly, all the brick walls. For a few in a very small cast that have a very strong influence over the information that makes their cast out to be sympathetic, or sympathetic because everyone's made to think that they could eventually become part of that cast if they just hit a lottery or just made the right song or invented the right thing. You too can be part of our cast. We'll show you on MTV Cribs. This person got lucky. This person, we pimped their ride.
You know, my favorite MTV Cribs, it was like some guy in a band, and his bedroom at home was decorated to resemble one of the suites at like a Marriott, because he spent so many nights in the Marriotts that when he got home, it didn't feel right and he couldn't sleep. Like, that's so weird and kind of sad. And that being said, some of the nicest sheets I've ever slept in have been at fancy ass hotels. And when I go look on their websites, some of these hotels offer to sell these sheets, new sheets, obviously. And they're not cheap at all. They're like hundreds of dollars. It's like, it kind of explains why they're so fancy, though. But not really.
So I think it's like, okay, so remember last month when that dude shot up a Subway in New York and didn't kill anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Well, he got arraigned on terrorism charges. Well, this white dude drove to Buffalo from 3.5 hours away, and they're not charging this motherfucker with terrorism, at least not yet. And killed specifically black people, and at one point pointed a gun at a white person. Was like, "Oh, sorry," and did not shoot that person. So we have a situation in which someone literally drove hundreds of miles,
went way out of their way
to terrorize black people, and the media refuses to call it terrorism. Meanwhile, a black person in this case shot up a subway station, didn't kill anyone, and they're being arraigned under terrorism charges. This is like the way that like black people are expected to then like support a government system that constantly polices us, leaves us to be murdered, kills us when we have no reason being policed, murders us, and then takes a white supremacist terrorist in alive. The motherfucker was about to kill himself and they talked him out of it. We have a police system that values white terrorists more than they value law-abiding black citizens. And this is why I'm still a second-class citizen in this country. I'm still a second-class citizen in this country. It's like in 2022, we have the racist Republicans pushing replacement theory where they're just willing to flat out murder people that look like me for being like the same skin tone. They might even be Indian. The motherfucker can't tell. They're going to murder that person because they look black. We have people on the right pushing that. And then we have people on the left, center, pretending to be on the left, telling me to vote to stop these people. It's like the most absurd, like, this shit isn't real. This can't be fucking real. This shit is not real. This is a joke.
Your vote matters.
I must be on some other plane of existence, and when I come here, it's like a joke to my, like, I don't know if it's like, oh, this is a karmic lesson for people to live as a black person in this specific country to understand when you are a second-class citizen, but also depended upon to carry the political party that says they're going to save us. They're going to save black people. We're going to give you either more police or we're going to do something, but it's not going to be actually protecting you or protecting your existence or doing anything to prevent racists
Holy
from
shit.
traveling.
Dude, no, wait. What you just said made me think, is karma racist as fuck then? Like, what would somebody do to incur karma's wrath to come back as a black man in America to experience this kind of systemic bullshit? This isn't even. I'm not even trying to pose a rhetorical question. That's like a terrible rhetorical question. Like, the idea of karma is so fucked up. Like, oh yeah, you get rewarded in the next life for your deeds in this one. You get punished in the next. Like,
well, it's fucking annoying because the same fucking people who were using patriotism to justify killing Nazis are now using patriotism to justify protecting Nazis. And as a black person, I'm still subject to being fucking killed just going to the goddamn grocery store because these people are fucking protecting Nazis and protecting terrorists. And in the meanwhile, painting black and brown people out to be terrorists in every other situation when it's not actually happening. So it's like, it's the weirdest. Like, for black people, we just have to keep on, like, even the ones, there was a shooting at McDonald's, someone got murdered, they just replaced the glass and kept on operating. It's like, black people do not get actually a chance to, like, heal, and the trauma just keeps adding up and adding up and adding up and adding up. But we're, like, depended upon to bear that trauma with, like, smiles on our faces so other white people don't feel bad. And it's like, it's fucking exhausting. It's fucking exhausting for white people to be learning about shit that I've had to, like, deal with as a black person and to be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Well, yeah, it's because you didn't fucking learn about it till goddamn you were 35 years old. Because you were in this little white bubble that you got to be in. You didn't have to learn about the black atrocities because your parents told you, oh, you need to have a little childhood. You need to not have to deal with that. The stuff with black people, that's too much for you. Even though black kids are out here getting fucking murdered by cops for being in the wrong place at the wrong fucking time. So it's like,
for playing in playgrounds
with the toy gun that clearly has an orange cap. So there's the existence. Black kids don't ever actually get to be kids, while white innocence is systematically protected and ensured to have institutional protection. And I'm not asking to destroy that. I'm just asking for institutional protection.
There was one black kid who got to be a kid. His name was Michael Jackson. And they ensured that he was a child for the bulk of his life until they ruined his life. That's just one example. That's the only example I can think of. He died a child. He died a child,
He died a child. He died a child the first time when his childhood was destroyed. And then when he died a grown man who never got to experience his childhood and perpetually stuck in that childhood.
Yeah.
So as one of the wealthiest black men to ever exist, not only did he not get a childhood, he was doomed to a prison of childhood from which he could never escape.
Yep.
The infantilization of the black man is something that perpetually occurs. So, down to this is, cowboys weren't white. They were black. No white man would have allowed himself to be called boy. So the idea of, like, cowboys being all white, bullshit. They were black dude ranchers that were racist, had the racism against them. So this whole idea of, like, then people being called boys that turned it into something that wasn't as offensive. Now it's cool. Now I want to be a cowboy. Well, you didn't want to be a fucking cowboy when it was only black men being called boy by people trying to infantilize us as men constantly. So this is the whole thing where I'm like, as it's like this then gets abused by people like Kevin Samuels, who then turn that into
Wait, that's that
a way
like
to
that's
exploit.
that weird misogynist dude, right? Who died?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
So it's like then people like him abuse that, but Joe Rogan is the white equivalent, in that a lot of black dudes gravitate towards Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson too, because of the systematic destruction of the connection to black, not just black, brown, and other people of color with their ethnic identities, so that white capitalism can come and sell it back to that person, either in the form of a DNA test, in the form of a hip hop CD, form of a fucking movie about Harriet Tubman. I'm selling you back a T-shirt with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on it. So all of these things are actively disconnected and then watered or whitewashed and sold back in a way that then the control of the narrative is in the hands of the oppressor at that point. So then you got white people trying to quote Dr. Martin Luther King at me. Oh, you're racist because you're acknowledging the color of the skin. He just wanted his dream. Well, you left out all the fucking anti-capitalist shit and you whitewashed Dr. Martin Luther King. So no, I'm not going to allow a white person to weaponize Dr. MLK against me ever. Not one time. Anytime a racist Republican starts that shit, I'm like, I stop them. No. You do not get to do that shit. You do not get to do that shit. They know 3 fucking words of a speech they never listened to fully and try to use that shit. No. I don't even entertain that shit. I don't suffer fools. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of people who want to be nice. I have no onus of responsibility to be nice to Nazis or racists. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in turning the other cheek. So if some racist says some shit and they're trying to weaponize Dr. Martin Luther King, not only am I going to tell them why the fuck they're wrong, I'm not going to let them tarnish Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words like that from somebody who was very much anti-capitalist, who they've then tried to whitewash. I'm not going to let that shit happen. Because again, this is where you get people who will quote Dr. Martin Luther King, but don't know his fucking daughter is on Twitter. They do not know who Bernice King is.
And what's funny is when they try to like quote him to her and tell her who her father was and
she don't have that shit.
And
either.
what he meant when he said those words. I love those threads because it's like when it does happen, it's like, does this person not have a fucking clue?
Oh, she brings the heat when people try to do that shit. It's beautiful to watch, and I can't believe people still try to do that shit to her specifically.
It's not like she
But
didn't know who her dad was.
Shannon Lee and Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
When Quentin Tarantino was trying to tell Shannon Lee who her father is because he saw some movies and he knows more. It's like, man, who the fuck are you? Who the fuck are you, Quentin?
Yeah, it's not like...
Oh, sit down, Quentin.
It's not like Shannon Lee didn't know who her dad was.
Yeah, this motherfucker trying to define him for other people when she's like, no, this was not him. Well, I've seen records. Shut the fuck up, Quentin. Go sit down. So that's where I'm like, that whole thing.
If he'd have just been like...
I was a fan.
If he'd have just said, it's a story, these are fictionalized characters, like that would have been the best outcome. But instead, he tried to pull some bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
If he'd have just straight up said, you know what, I agree, it's not, but this is a narrative of fiction, and I'm going to take liberties with my story because I'm trying to tell a story here. It's not real. It might say once upon a time in Hollywood, but it didn't say these are the actual events.
his code switching never set right with me in the first place. But then once he came out and did that shit, I'm like, nah, bro, you are not cool. You no longer as far. I mean, I'm sure other black people would be like, well, he's still cool, and it's like it's fine, but it's the well. On the other hand, I know a lot more black people were into Bruce Lee that would not appreciate that shit either. So it's like I feel like he distanced himself from the black community by going at Bruce Lee the way he did, and it was more like I feel like he was trying to. It's weird because the way he code switches, he clearly knows he has a white audience and he has a black audience. I feel like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was him trying to play up to the white audience using some of the techniques that he built up catering to his black audience. And that's where I never watched it because I'm like, I'm not trying to entertain this. I have studied Jeet Kune Do. I consider myself like one of the people in that school. So it's like I'm not about to sit here and try to see, do I need to give this man the benefit of the doubt because he put this thing out about if the family doesn't like it, I'm not about to sit here and try to be like, oh, my opinion of this overrides the family. The family don't like it. I'm not fucking supporting that shit. So if the family was not happy with it, he should have respected that shit in a way where it's like, if you're trying to tell this story, well then don't make it about Bruce then, or about this guy who's supposed to be like Bruce. If you're not trying to offend the family or people who appreciate him and his spirit for being something bigger than a Hollywood actor, because he represents more than kung fu films to a lot of people. And when
it's like disingenuous to reduce Bruce Lee to just kung fu fighting or beating up Chuck Norris. And I want to emphasize he beat the bricks off of Chuck Norris.
And Chuck Norris lied about it for decades, and he only recently came out and acknowledged that he was lying.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
it's like
beat the bricks off Chuck Norris. Like it wasn't. The outcome is he had to lie. That's how bad it was.
So knowing, well, especially with Gene LaBelle and Steve Seagal, and knowing that there are these people who tread the line between stunt person and real martial arts practitioner, it's really easy for somebody like Quentin Tarantino, who's clearly not a martial arts practitioner, to come in and be like, oh, Bruce Lee was just all movie and blah, 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 and he wasn't real. And it's like, well, times are different, man. Like, the gyms, they'd have to have street fights. If you were in martial arts, motherfuckers would just challenge you because you were in martial arts. That's the way shit used to be. And it still kind of is. It's like, it's still, if you're actually in martial arts, somebody may just be like, hey, I heard you're in martial arts. Let's fight. And you don't really have a choice. You have a choice, but if that person doesn't want to give you a choice, you don't have a choice. You have to diffuse it or beat the shit out of them. You don't have to necessarily beat the shit out. But what I'm getting at is
you have to demonstrate the techniques to sufficiently that they
to diffuse them and their antagonism.
Yeah.
The issue becomes if somebody wants to prove that they're better than you, they're just going to keep pushing you until it becomes an actual fight, whether you want it to or not. You can try all of the peaceful diplomatic techniques or talking things down. Well, if that person has come deciding they want to test themselves against you, you don't really have a choice. And that's the shit in martial arts was way worse before we had UFC and Bellator and actual leagues. Because, they had karate tournaments and they had martial arts tournaments, but it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for, like I said, somebody to just walk into your gym and be like, oh, you're the head of this school, let's fight. I'm a boxer. I don't believe this kung fu mumbo jumbo. Well, you can't let that shit happen in front of your students and just have somebody, well, I don't believe in your shit. Well, now you got to prove it in front of your students. So there is a whole lot about the reality of real time interactions happening in a way that a lot of the stuff that became lore in martial arts was based in some reality. But there's obviously places where people stretch the truth and shit like that. And it's like, well, yeah, Bruce Lee really did have to fight somebody that was sent from the Chinese martial arts representatives to fucking retain his right to keep teaching. But the way the movie presented it, that's not exactly how he got hurt. So there's all these things about, like, yeah, Bruce Lee had to fucking fight his way against an appointed challenger to keep the right to keep teaching martial arts. And because he won that match is the only reason he kept the right to teach it. So it's like, that shit is fucking 1,000% true, but the circumstances surrounding it.
Well, you know that you've heard the audio, the recording from that encounter. There are people that were.
No, I haven't heard the audio.
There's an audio recording of it, and there's been forensic analysis performed, and they did interviews with the people who are still alive, who were present, and they discuss like what was going on, and it's like the fiercest sounding Bruce Lee that you've ever heard. It's definitely cool sounding. Like, all those noises he makes in movies are very real. I mean, that's like the most terrifying sound imaginable.
Well, because then you find out Bruce Lee wasn't such a super innocent person. He was like starting fights when he was a teenager. Yeah. So he wasn't like this mythical character is 100% perfect either. And that's like, the more you learn about it, the more likely it's like, oh shit, this dude probably did get in a bunch of street fights because he was going out starting street fights. So early on, knowing that this like young antagonistic version of Bruce Lee is the one that probably spawned the need for the more wise, patient appearing mythical master is like, yeah, those two things are two sides of the same coin. You can't learn restraint if you don't understand impulse. Like, if there's no impulse to restrain, you're not restraining anything. Which is where I think, the most impulsive person, if they can control it, learns the most restraint. And that's why ultimately the thing that came of being born into this super impulsive body is the mythical dragon of controlling himself that he had to learn, because otherwise the impulse would have gotten him killed. And maybe it did. Maybe the impulse was what, because obviously there's still the issues surrounding his death were then even more mythicized. And it's like, well, maybe it's because he got his fucking sweat glands removed. That was kind of impulsive.
Yeah, that just sounds like a bad idea.
It sounds like a terrible idea. And which, again, at the time when you're like a young up and coming movie star, you're like, oh, I'll get my sweat glands to removed so it makes me look better on camera. Oh, that's kind of impulsive. That's just, that's totally in line with this idea of like, he's keeping this major impulse in control this whole time, which is why he appears super wise and restrained. It's because his impulses were like the worst. He had the worst impulse.
But who removes a gland?
Exceptional Radio.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.